16% of Americans say they know someone who's trans. That means the rest of America is learning who trans people are through media. And so if we share fair and accurate and humanizing stories of trans people, we will build acceptance and safety. Ultimately, it's about living in a safe society.
Okay, Scott, it's Pride Month.
Happy
Woohoo!
Pride.
Happy Pride. What's Pride like over on your coast in LA?
Los Angeles?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's always hard to tell whether when it's Pride Month in West Hollywood, where I was just there the other week, and obviously it is Pride Month, so yeah. But it's kind of always, every night is hopping and bopping, and there are parties and celebrations and libations. But again, this happens pretty regularly all year long in West Hollywood. Where I am, in my little enclave by the beach, it's a typical June day, and not a whole lot of activity, but you do see the flags out there. This is the time of year where you see the flags. A lot of the pride washing, rainbow washing. I don't know what they call it. There's definitely some criticism around some of the ways
corporations marketing themselves. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Look, it's obviously a great month to celebrate the LGBT community and to stand with them. And unfortunately, you'd think every year would just get better and better and easier. But there seems to be a regression and just, I don't know. We can't seem to get past some of these issues.
And a lot of the responsibility more and more falls on employers, not just for things like health benefits, insurance, covering things like therapy, medical procedures, but also just creating this safe environment to make sure that all your employees can be who they want to be and lean into their own identities. So we had a couple of really great conversations on this episode. Today we're speaking with Sarah Kate Ellis, the CEO of GLAAD, about how the nonprofit is working to shape the media narrative around LGBTQ plus issues, not just during Pride Month, but all year round. And then we'll hear a very personal transition story from Ellie Parsons, who tells us how businesses, employers, and colleagues can actually be supportive and offer resources to LGBTQ plus folks. We will get to our conversation first with Sarah Kate Ellis after a quick break. This episode of Business Casual is sponsored by Grayscale, the world's largest crypto asset manager and provider of crypto investment funds. So you've probably heard about crypto by now. You're curious, but you don't know where to start. It's true. Getting into crypto can feel intimidating, and you probably have a lot of questions, like what's a safe way to invest in crypto? And is there a way to invest in the brokerage account you already have? That's where Grayscale comes in. You can invest in Grayscale's public products simply by searching for its ticker symbol in your current brokerage or retirement account, such as your Robinhood account or Fidelity IRA. For example, try GBTC to find Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, which is currently the world's largest Bitcoin fund. Why not start your crypto journey today with Grayscale? To learn more, visit grayscale.com/businesscasual. That's grayscale.com/businesscasual. It's never too late to diversify your portfolio into crypto.
Sarah Kate, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. We want to get into your background. We want to talk all about GLAAD and what exactly the organization does, however. So let's start with that, okay? GLAAD was founded in 1985 by a small group of writers and journalists in New York City in response to the New York Post's defamatory HIV and AIDS coverage. And look, for those of us who have grown up in a more enlightened and accepting culture, can you describe what that coverage around gay issues was like back in the 80s?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you both. And the reason that it was founded was because it was during the AIDS crisis. And what was happening is the newspapers were reporting on specifically really gay men in incredibly terrible ways, like defamatory. And we realized that we had to be a watchdog, our founders did, and to hold them accountable. At the same time, which I thought was just the sheer brilliance of our founders, they realized that a lot of the reasons we were being covered this way is because nobody knew who we were. We were essentially invisible. And so what they did was they started to lobby Hollywood in order to have our stories told and have us included in storytelling out of Hollywood. So it was like there are two things that were happening at the same time. One was being a watchdog and holding media and journalists accountable for their coverage specifically around AIDS. And at the same time, it was about including us in storytelling out of the shows and movies out of Hollywood.
Well, Sarah Kate, if you look at the About page for GLAAD, it says GLAAD rewrites the script for LGBTQ acceptance. And I'd love for you to explain to us what exactly that means. What are the entities you're working with, and how has the mission around that changed over the last 35 years?
That's a great question. It's funny. The mission has never changed. What has changed is the world around the mission. And so we've had to morph around that. So if you think about it, in 1985, culture and the cultural conversation was coming out of two places, New York media and Hollywood, California. And so we were in both of those places. Now, culture is created by CEOs, it's created by Silicon Valley, it's created by influencers, it's created by politicians. So we've had to change. So where we used to be just in those two places, now we work with businesses. Now we work with Silicon Valley. Now we work with video games. Do you know there's a disproportionate amount of LGBTQ people who play video games and are engaged in video games? Not to mention that you can't know a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha who doesn't play video games. I mean, they just barely exist in this country, at least. And so we've had to go to all these places to help shape the narrative. And the way I talk about it is, in terms of rewriting the script, is really about creating the narrative that's fair and accurate around our community. And we are still a watchdog, absolutely, but we are also working with a lot of these places that create culture to help shape the narrative around the LGBTQ community.
And with definitions evolving, awareness evolving over time, it's a big responsibility for you, Sarah Kate, being the president and CEO of GLAAD. So you stepped into that role in 2014. What were some of your first priorities when you started working with GLAAD, and what got you to that point?
So I think the main priority when I got to the organization was really about modernizing the organization, because we hadn't kept up with the changing media environment and the changing community, as you both have pointed out. There were those two big things that were happening, and we needed to catch up and then get ahead of it too, even. And so that was really my objective when I first started, was expanding the organization and then making sure that it was really fully inclusive.
Well, it's interesting. There's an article that was published back in 2016 called "How Sarah Kate Ellis Saved GLAAD," and because it really, I mean, I guess this is a part of the history that many people don't know, but GLAAD was really in a crisis when you joined in 2014. There were revenue issues, and the whole. It seemed like the tactics, they were campaigns against Hollywood people, like Alec Baldwin, Tracy Morgan, really being abrasive towards Hollywood in a sense, whereas you've now changed the mode to maybe embrace Hollywood. And I'm just curious how you said I was either hired to turn GLAAD around or shut it down, and what made you choose to turn it around versus maybe taking that other route of shutting it down?
It was really, it wasn't my choice whether or not it was going to turn around or shut down. I wanted it to turn around. It was whether or not the market could support it and would support it, truly. And that was about going out to donors and supporters. And it was a really, we were working off of what you call a depletion model, meaning that I would look every day and see how many days I had until we were out of money. So it was a painful first year, a lot of sleepless nights on making payroll and things like that. But what I found was, the world needs GLAAD, and people believed in the organization and the greatness that it could achieve. And so people really got behind it to support us and get us back up on our feet again.
Where does that funding come from? What is the business model for, an organization that is for the greater good?
So it varies. And the one thing that was very, weighed heavily on me when I first started was that we were really dependent on our GLAAD Media Awards, which are these two big events that we do in LA and New York, but those events are actually programmatic events, because what we do is we measure media on representation, and then those who do it really well, instead of just being a watchdog, we decided we needed to give rewards for people and encourage people to do great work. So those were the basic lines of revenue. Since then, we've expanded tremendously. So we have a lot of great foundation work. We have a lot of major philanthropists. And then we also have our GLAAD Media Institute. And our GLAAD Media Institute was born out of this idea that here were businesses, especially Hollywood businesses, and now it's expanded across every industry. But initially when I started, who were using our IP to create these magnificent shows that they were getting revenue, grossing a lot of revenue off of, and we weren't getting anything. So they were telling our stories, we were advising them on them, and then they were profiting off of them. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem right, and we're a marginalized community. So we created an arm of the GLAAD Media Institute where we have an actual consultancy arm, and we are retained by most Hollywood studios and networks and streamers, actually I think all of them at this point, and we work with them from everything from script ideas, ideation, writing, rewrites. We're embedded in productions. We're in a dozen productions at any given moment. And then if we like the product at the end, because they can take our advice or leave it. If we like the product, we will support it. If we think it's fair and accurate and that it will help our community, we'll support it on a promotional level. But that's a line of revenue that we didn't have before. That has really helped the organization as well. But we always reserve the right. I always say my number one client is the community. And so if I think any content is dangerous for the community, I will speak out, even though we might be retained. It's always our first. It's our first right.
So the lines of revenue are in support of the community. That is the bottom line. So you used to work in the for-profit space. You were the vice president of marketing at Real Simple before you joined GLAAD. What were some learnings from the for-profit world that you applied to the nonprofit world of GLAAD that allowed you to come up with these strategies to create the sustainable business, even though it is for the community at the end of the day?
Well, I think what was really interesting that I was able to take over from being on the business side of magazine publishing was how to value work and how to assign a value to the work that we did. And I think that most importantly, I always called it the lowest hanging fruit. When I started and we were talking about the financial challenges that we had, I knew how to work through business to get a large sum of money from them to support the what we perceived as a large sum of money. It's all relative, to support our business. So I was able to put together sponsorships and packages pretty early on with corporates because I understood what they valued and I knew what we had as assets, and I could put those together. We've moved a lot more away from that and into this consultancy model now. But that was around events too. So we did more events then too.
We're talking to someone else in this episode, Sarah Kate, Ellie Parsons, who was sharing her transition experience and how she navigated that at work. And one of the things she emphasized is the fact that there's no typical transition story or narrative. Everyone's journey is different. And you mentioned how vast the community is, how everyone wants to, you celebrate the individual within the community. Why do you think it's so important when it comes to fairly and accurately telling the stories of transgender lives in the media? I mean, you talk openly yourself about how it took you a long time to come out at work during the late 90s, early 2000s, but when you did, your career took off. So you're like Cy Sperling, you're not just the president, you're also a client. You're also part of this community. I'd love to hear about your story and how you bring that to your work.
Absolutely. So I think what's so important in terms of, I think there's two questions there. The first being trans representation, right? So in all of the research that we have, and I'm super research geeky based, I like to do a lot of research to understand the challenges and the problems and then create a strategy against them to tackle them. So one of the things that I know is 90% of Americans say they know someone who's gay or lesbian or bi, and 16% of Americans say they know someone who's trans. That means the rest of America is learning who trans people are through media. And so if we share fair and accurate and humanizing stories of trans people, we will build acceptance and safety. Ultimately, it's about living in a safe society. Trans people do not live in a safe society in the United States of America. It's not happening right now. And so by telling their stories and by humanizing them, we are able to bring people along, to change hearts and minds, to educate, and therefore create a safe society for especially trans and gender nonconforming folks. In terms of my own coming out story, it is very much like you said, Scott, which is I didn't come out because I thought it was going to be a career wrecker. And what it ended up being was a career accelerator. So it was the exact opposite of what I thought it was going to be. And it was terrifying, though. And I think, still, this day and age, as even with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, where, they are out and proud in a different way than we were ever able to or thought we could ever be, it's still terrifying coming out. Make no mistake, for the LGBTQ community, even if there are pride flags all over the office, you just don't know how people are going to react. And so I kudos to Ellie for coming out. It's brave, and you have to make sure, though, when you are coming out, that you have a safety plan in place for yourself.
GLAAD, I know, posted a piece recently covering recommendations for corporate allies, and we'd love to hear from you. What does corporate accountability mean in practice, whether it's creating a safe environment for your employees or how you spend your dollars, your advocacy for legislation? What are the recommendations there?
So I think the great news here is that corporate allyship is evolving. What it used to look like was inside of the corporation, it was about policies and procedures and ERGs, which stands for Employee Resource Groups, inside the organizations. Now, and over the past couple of years, what we've thought and where we play and work as GLAAD is in how are you showing up externally? How are you using your advertising dollars? How are you speaking out against all of this anti-LGBTQ legislation? What politicians are you funding? And how bad are they for our community? And so when we put together a recommendation, it's with the understanding that within your organization and company that you have the right policies, and there are multiple organizations that can actually help you with that, like Out and Equal. And then there is this outward, how are you using your public sphere to help this community? Because I want to be really clear with corporates. You can't just advertise to us and market to us in the month of June. If you are joining our movement. Our movement is a movement of marginalized people who need support year round. And I just think that somehow, because pride is fun and joyous, and it should be, that some people lose the plot here, that we have people who are being murdered. We have 250 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been put against us. We have a rhetoric campaign from some far-right people that is damaging and causing great pain. If you saw this weekend, there were 31 people arrested for heading to a pride group in Idaho to start a riot. So we are still living in an unsafe America, and we need corporates to step up and not just market to our community.
Well, it's unfortunate that, unfortunate but almost predictable that issues around LGBTQ in this country would become politicized. You'd think everyone, regardless of political party, would agree that everyone has the individual right to express themselves and be themselves, and there's nothing political about that. But you mentioned these far-right groups and these bills. GLAAD has to get political, right? Because you're playing within this system. How do you navigate the politics of it? Because again, it's just like, half the country votes one way, half the country votes the other way. But these are basic human rights issues that you're trying to advocate for. What is your strategy there?
Well, you said it. The majority of the country, though, votes for equality. And time again, year over year, we measure this. And Americans believe that LGBTQ people should be safe and equal and have justice on their side. And so it is, I'm not going to lie, it's really hard right now because it's been by a handful of specific and a few politicians has really politicized and demonized our community for their own gain. And I think the CDC last month said that 1 out of 4 LGBTQ youth attempted suicide last year. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. Mm. Yeah. So I think it's taking a toll on our community. It absolutely, positively is. And I think it's hard not to be political. But what I always tell corporates especially is that the second you make this political, you've let them win, because this is about human issues. And this is about the safety of your employees and the safety of your customers.
And when you're dealing with the media, like GLAAD is so involved with, can you make that point to corporations? These politicians you mentioned, they have a platform on Fox News, and they have support there. So is there an effort underway to say, hey, if you really are allies with our community and you want to work with GLAAD, pull your ads out of there, out of Fox News, out of Fox websites? I mean, I'm using Fox as an example, but are those some of the tactics that GLAAD pursues?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And I think, one of the things that I'm looking at for this upcoming year, so first of all, the one thing that will make my hair raise here that we haven't even addressed is the Equality Act. So the Equality Act protects our jobs, our employment, our public accommodations, credit, lending, all the things that are just assumed in this world are not basic for the LGBTQ community, which can be denied simply for being LGBTQ. And the only thing that's protected right now at a federal level are our marriages and employment due to the Supreme Court. But that can be revisited at any given moment. There are 2 judges who have specifically said that they want to re-look at marriage equality. And so there's actually a piece of legislation that is sitting with the Senate right now that we hope to see go through that would give our community long-sought protections that we don't have.
To what extent, and this sort of ties into Scott's question though, what do you find has been the most effective in swaying politicians? You talked about consulting in media and entertainment and how that impacts the societal views of the community. But what has worked so far on the politics side for GLAAD?
The best thing is storytelling, hands down. I think President Biden said it when he was the vice president, that he felt that Will and Grace had done more for marriage equality than anything else. And when you tell a good story and you bring people in, you move hearts and minds, and you move culture, and you create a new understanding. And so I think for us, it's been very much around storytelling. The other is working with CEOs who are talking to members and talking to senators and have a stake in the game. And that's part of what we're talking about for Pride too, is that your internal values your internal value proposition of how you present internally needs to match how you operate externally. And that's where we see CEOs, we hope to start seeing them step up in a more profound way.
Sarah Kate, you're doing storytelling not just through GLAAD, but you also literally wrote a story. You wrote a book called All Moms with your wife, Kristen Ellis Henderson. Tell us a little bit about the book and where people can find it.
Here it is.
Nice.
So it's available wherever books are sold. And this was really a fun project. And the reason that we did this project was my wife and I, we have twin 13-year-olds. And when they were little, we couldn't find books that represented our family. It was really sad. And we found this one book called Mommy, Mama, and Me. And our kids fought over it. So we had to buy a few of them and have them on every shelf. And when we got the opportunity to work with Little Bee Books and create the books that were missing from our lives, it was just an extraordinary gift. And this book is just a love letter to moms, but to all parents who give their kids unconditional love. And we just want young kids to see their families represented no matter what they look like. So we have, Janie's two dads, and we have someone who has a nana that's raising them, because kids need to see themselves and feel included.
Mm-hmm. Makes such a difference. So check it out wherever you get your books. All right, I think we'll leave things there. Sarah Kate, it was so great to have you with us on the pod. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. Really, thank you for sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it. And we know you haven't shared it with many people publicly like this before, so this is exciting to get the scoop. Before we get into the story in the last couple of years, first, tell us, what is your current role at Ovia Health, and what is it that you actually do as a person working in IT and software engineering? Because that's something that is still, all these years later, mind-boggling to me that people know how to do computers, as my
You're
parents
outing
say.
yourself, Scott.
How do you do computers?
So my title is Director of Mobile Engineering. Basically, I lead the Android and iOS development teams at Ovia Health, and we build apps for tracking fertility, pregnancy, and parenting, and helping identify when people could be fertile, or if they're pregnant, if there could be complications with their pregnancy. So I lead the team that manages the app or builds the apps on both of those platforms.
And to be the director of this engineering, obviously you're very experienced. You've done this for many, many years. Can you share us more about your background, and not just with your career, but also just painting a picture of who you are and what you were like growing up and some of your interests, hobbies?
So I'll talk a little bit about just like my background and growing up. Like I didn't really fit that typical narrative of a trans person, and just knowing from a young age that, oh yeah, I'm in the wrong body, that kind of a thing. Like I was a boy growing up, just normal kid, and I don't know, one day, like, one of my chores was like taking the trash out. And so one day I was getting the trash out of my sister's room, and she had a pair of nylons in there. I'm like, I wonder what it would be like to wear these. So I kind of put those on, and like, oh wow, this feels good. So that kind of like started it, but it was always just kind of like a weird like thing I would kind of very privately do, like wear women's clothing, and and I just thought it was like, but other than that, I was just like normal person. Went to high school, was a depressed teen because I didn't have a girlfriend. Went to college, met a bunch of friends there, met my wife there, and had kids, or got married, then had kids, just kind of like that normal. And then, it's kind of like in the background, this was just kind of like always there, festering maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so every transition story is unique, and you had your own journey. So bring us to just the last couple of years. It sounds like a lot changed for you during the pandemic, and you were able to continue exploring your identity even further.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, we went remote. Like, we were an in-person company, so it was always, in the office every day. But once we went remote, all meetings were just, virtual, and you can only see like from the chest up. So it was kind of like, oh, I can, wear a pair of leggings or something, or I could wear a dress, and then if I gotta if I have to join a meeting, I can just throw a hoodie on, and so it kind of allowed me to explore the studio space, if you will. And I was also still going into the office just because I had to get out of my house. Like, I just can't stay in this place, 5 days a week. So even though I would go into the office, there'd be no one there, but I'd have the whole place to myself. I can kind of, explore myself. And yeah, it was like kind of like a safe space for me to find out who I was. Yeah.
And Ovia itself seems like it was a safe space, a workplace, safe workplace to have this transition. And in fact, you mentioned to one of our producers that there was another non-binary employee at Ovia Health at the time. Was that helpful in making this transition? Did you reach out to this person? What were those conversations like?
Yeah. So the non-binary person, we had the same job title, just on different sides of the business, or we performed the same job role. And so we would just meet every now and then anyway, just to, see what work is like on the other side of the business. And then at one point I was kind of like, just started talking to her about like, hey, I think I could be trans. And they were just very supportive and just kind of like explaining that, yeah, there's definitely something there. And they kind of like helped me to, kind of figure things out. And at first, like, I had no idea, because there's so many different labels: non-binary, trans, genderqueer, all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell I am. So going through that whole process, so they were very helpful. And then also just in general, Ovia, it was just like it is like just a very accepting culture. At the time, our CEO, he was just very supportive of saying, like, look, bring your whole self to work, make yourself vulnerable. It's important, like to do that even at work. So he kind of set the tone for the culture, and it kind of, went from the top down. And I just really appreciated that culture of acceptance. And I felt it was important to contribute to that culture. So I'm like, I guess, I guess I can, talk to everybody about it. So after talking to the non-binary person, there were a few other people I had close relationships with, and I would talk to them as well. And then I was like, yeah, I think I can like make a company announcement like, hey, I'm trans. And I'm pretty sure it'll be like a well-accepted thing. And yeah, it was great. Everybody was super warm and embracing and accepting. So it was the easiest place like I could ever come out.
I'm curious to know how you've, because this is a recent transition, right? In the pandemic, this is only the last couple of years. But even going back further, 5 years, 10 years, I forget when all these things happened, but obviously Caitlyn Jenner's story, her coming out. You had Transparent TV show or Netflix show. Transgender visibility has increased so much in the last handful of years. Seeing that happen from your perspective, were all those things impacting you at all? Was it making you feel more comfortable over the years? Or I'm just curious how the culture shift has also affected your decision to make the transition recently.
Definitely. Like society, just the changes in society played a huge part. I grew up as a kid in the 80s and 90s, and we were just starting to accept gay people back then. Forget about trans people. Yeah. It's like there was no way I could ever have thought like, oh, I'm trans. Like I said, it was just kind of like a weird thing that I thought I did, and I never thought anything else about it. But as time has gone on, society has become much more accepting, and it's just kind of like a realization that there are a lot of people that have different experiences out there, and it's not just like a weird one-off kind of a thing. Like it seems to be more common than when I was growing up.
So, of course, outside forces, external entities, whether it's society or your employer, it is so important to make you feel safe in your journey. So, going back to the safe space that your employer created, for any other business leaders out there, people who are starting their own companies, what tips do you have to ensure that it is coming from the top and you're creating this environment where people can be themselves?
Yeah, so like you said, it has to. I think it has to start from the top, and it can't just be like the top level. Like it's got to trickle down. Everybody, I don't want to say buy in, but everybody, because that makes it. I don't know. It's not doesn't sound great, but everybody also has to see things the same way, and just to kind of foster that environment. I think it's tough because it's such a personal thing. Like you have people on different sides of the spectrum. So I don't want to say like, just hire accepting people, like, because there are people that are out there that aren't as accepting, but, from like that kind of cultural perspective, I don't have a great answer. But there's other things I think companies can do, such as like, providing benefits, like health benefits, to cover hormone therapy, mental health therapy, surgeries, stuff like that.
Right. So there's the top-down element, there's the CEO, the executives, but how about fellow employees? What kind of support did you receive from them, and how can, again, in an advice sense, if this is happening at other workplaces, how can colleagues of a trans person support them going through the transition? Is there anything people shouldn't do or things they think might be helpful to say or do but really isn't in your experience?
I mean, just, be accepting, just do your best. Like if somebody changes their pronouns or their names, like just do their best. And if you find yourself messing up, and you catch yourself, just, correct yourself and move on. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. I had been at Ovia for 3 years, and then I had changed my name, and I was just incredibly impressed with how everybody was able to just seamlessly transition. So it's possible, but I also find myself making those same mistakes. Like there are other non-binary people at work, and sometimes I make the mistake of using the wrong pronouns, and I correct myself and move on.
So we've talked about the workplace environment when someone goes through transition. How about the nuts and bolts of it and the finances? Because from what we know, it's not always a cheap or affordable thing to do, and it certainly helps when employers and businesses can provide benefits to employees going through a transition. Insurance covering associated doctors' bills and fees. If you're comfortable with sharing, what were some of the monetary costs, expected and unexpected, when it came to your transition?
Sure. So, like you had said earlier, I'm still pretty early in my transition. So far, it hasn't been terribly bad. Like my health insurance has covered hormone therapy. It's covered my mental health visits to my therapist. It looks like it should cover surgeries, top or bottom surgeries or facial surgeries. So I'm fortunate in that regard. Something that I hadn't really expected was like hair removal. It sounds kind of silly, but I had thought like, oh, of course, hair removal has to be covered. Like, what kind of woman wants to have a beard? But no, it's not covered at all. And it's expensive and painful. Yeah. So that was, I don't know, I guess the only kind of unexpected cost. And actually that is a really important thing, because if I had to pay out of pocket for like these huge surgeries, like it would really have me second guessing, options like that. But knowing that it's covered, it's definitely more of an option.
Certainly hope that employers are listening and know how important it is to offer these kinds of benefits and policies. So, Ellie, we are having this conversation during LGBTQ Pride Month, and brands, companies will decide to talk about Pride only in the month of June and then sort of forget to be an ally and a supporter for the rest of the year, which is a little bit sad. But what do you think we should keep in mind? What do you want people to know in just creating the most supportive environment possible, not in just the month of June, but all year round?
Sure. So, yeah, just in general, being trans is hard. It's hard to come out and, say this is who you really are. So just, accepting us, people like myself, for who we are is a huge thing. It's I can't even imagine how hard it must be for a kid who's trans. Like, it's got to be so much harder. Like, I can just remember when I was growing up, just kids getting bullied for whatever reason. So I just can't imagine, being a trans kid. I feel like our lives are hard enough. When policymakers make these laws that kind of go against helping the kids, like, what are you doing? Our lives are hard enough as it is, and as far as like corporations go, don't come out and say, oh yeah, we live pride and LGBTQ people, but then don't go and donate to like anti-trans policymakers or PACs like that.
I mean, even if you sharing your story on this podcast helps one listener be more comfortable in discovering themselves, then that's a win. So we
exactly.
That,
there's no I think you're doing a wonderful job, and we appreciate it. It's time now for Quizness Casual, the business casual quiz with Ellie Parsons, our guest today, and of course, Nora, you will be teammates with Ellie here.
All right.
As I ask my questions all about Boston sports. Because, Ellie, you've lived in the great state of Rhode Island, the Ocean State, for over 25 years. And you've mentioned you're a big Boston sports fan. So it's baseball season. Let's specifically talk about the Boston Red Sox. Go Sox! But here we go for Cumero Numero Uno. Which historic event overshadowed the Red Sox opening day in 1912 at their, at the time, brand new Fenway Park, and their 7-6 victory over the New York Highlanders, later called the Yankees? So what else happened on that day in 1912, opening day at Fenway? Was it the assassination of President William McKinley, the Hindenburg airship disaster, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, which set off World War I, or the sinking of the Titanic?
Oh my gosh, this is tough.
So this is more
Ellie,
about
do you
just
have any idea?
general history
this is
question.
History, yeah.
Thinking about 1912. Bring yourself back to 1912. 110 years ago.
I'm not that old.
History is
I
my
was
worst
thinking
subject.
was it Franz Ferdinand, the assassination?
Archduke.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
The only thing I can think of is the Titanic. Like, that sounds like the right time frame for the Titanic to have sunk.
So you're thinking about the sinking? Is that what you're thinking?
Thinking about the sinking is what we're thinking, yes.
That might be a good way to think. Because on April 20th, 1912, the same day Fenway Park opened, that news didn't even make Boston's front pages. It was the ocean liner Titanic's tragic sinking on its maiden voyage a few days earlier that still ruled the news.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So that is what happened there, the sinking of the Titanic.
The
Congrats,
sad
you
day.
got that right.
Thanks.
1 for 1. Batting 1,000. Here comes Q2. You ready for this one? This is a little more recent. This is more recent in your lifetime, in our lifetime, okay? On October 27th, 2004, the Boston Red Sox won their first championship in 86 years, breaking the curse of the Bambino that had plagued them since 1918. Which team did the Sox defeat in that World Series?
St. Louis Cardinals.
See, didn't even need the multiple choice. Didn't even need the options. Nora might be scratching her head, but Ellie got it without the options. Yes,
Scott.
St. Louis Cardinals. It was a sweep, a 4-0 series sweep. We'll never forget that, will you, Ellie?
No, what a crazy. Because we were still trying to get over the Yankees series. Like, they beat the Yankees in 7, and we were like, when is game 8? Like, it just felt like every night was just exhausting.
Exactly.
So,
the ALCS was really the World Series that year. I mean,
Yeah.
people kind of forget that the Sox just went ahead and swept the Cardinals. All right, final question. We're 2 for 2. We're cruising here. What were the Boston Red Sox originally called when the franchise was founded back in 1901? A charter member of the American League, okay? Was it the Boston Blue Sox, the Boston Americans, the Boston Independents, or the Boston Continentals?
Blue Sox is just like crazy enough to maybe be true. Like, maybe he's trying to fool us, but maybe it really was it.
What's the White Sox origin? Why this obsession with socks in baseball? I don't understand.
I'm thinking maybe Americans. Ugh, that doesn't seem good.
Should we just go with it?
YOLO.
YOLO Americans. Yeah.
Americans. F yeah. Yeah. Yes, you got it right.
Ellie!
Amazing.
One of the 8 charter members of the American League, the Boston Americans.
Wow, how unoriginal.
Before they adapted to the Red Sox, which was based off the Red Stockings because of the red stockings that they wore. And the Cincinnati Reds, they're called the Reds because they had red stockings. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, baseball, not that imaginative, I guess. But, Ellie, you nailed it. 3 for 3. You're batting better than Rafi Devers over here. We got Carl Yastrzemski over here. Triple Crown winner, Ellie Parsons. Thank you so much for joining us today. And congrats on the quiz. Honestly, that was very impressive.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie.
Thanks. Can I just give like a little shout out to a few people who were very supportive during my transition?
Please.
Sure. So just a few people that I had worked with and friends that were just, the few people I first started talking to, just Lexi, Maddie, Seamus, Nicole, and Melody. They were all just very supportive, and I'm very grateful that, we crossed paths when we did, and they were part of my life. So thank you to all of them.
If you like what you saw and you like what you heard, you can listen to the entire episode of this podcast, Business Casual, anywhere you get your podcasts. And please go ahead and subscribe to the Morning Brew YouTube channel and go ahead and click on that alarm bell, that thing right there, so you can be alerted anytime there's a new video.